Formal versus informal associationalism. Hope everyone is doing well today. Welcome to the Baptist broadcast. Good to have everyone here. Those of you who chose to be here, those of you who are spending your valuable time to either watch or listen to this podcast, I thank you very, very much. Formal versus informal associationalism. What do I mean by that? Well, I think if you're a Baptist and you're tuning into this, we all know what it means to be associated. We can think of various associations. We can think of the Southern Baptist Convention is very similar to an association, and then the kind of sub-conventions that exist within that and associations that exist within the Southern Baptist Convention are kind of versions of associations, if you will. But then we think of other kinds of associations, like the association that was formed during the drafting, or not during the drafting, but during the time, I guess you could say, 1677, 1688, 1689. During that period of time, to which historically applies the Second London Confession of Faith the most, in those years there in London. So that's another kind of association that's much weaker than something you might get in the SBC. Well, in some regard, it's actually stronger, but in others, it's weaker. And that, we're going to talk about that here in a moment. But that's another kind of an association. Then you have something like ARBCA, the Association of Reformed Baptist Churches of America, which has been reduced to almost nothing in recent years, but that is nevertheless a kind of association. So when we're talking about associations, Baptist associations of churches, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about churches that are like-minded, that have come together to associate with one another through various means and for various reasons. Okay, and so that's a really broad way of defining associationalism, but that, as far as I understand it, breaks out into formal and informal associations. Formal and informal associations. So, a formal association. When I think of a formal association, I think of an association that is marked by a brand. And has a name, a kind of common moniker that all the churches could be known by if they're part of it. And then that brand is incorporated in some way, shape, or form, usually in a nonprofit status, and then has certain, facilitating bodies within it that are pulled from the churches collectively to administrate things like funds for missionaries, funds for general assemblies, and things like that. Okay, that's a formal association, and an example of a formal association would be that which you see in the SBC, and also something like ARBCA, and those are kind of to one extent or another formal associations. An informal association would be more or less what you see among the London Baptists, where there's no brand associated with this. There's no governing body apart from the local churches that are collected out of the local churches to govern part of the business of the collective of that body of local churches. But they do come together and they have a common bond of doctrine. And the doctrine is expressed in something like the Second London Confession. Okay, but it's an informal association because there is no formal business or administration that is flowing through the administration or any sort of body that the administration establishes to handle that kind of administrative or kind of business logistics, let's say. All right, so thinking about things like monies, convention or assembly planning, missions, what have you. All right. So an informal association, in my thinking, would be, just churches that have decided to come together and observe their common doctrine through fellowship. All right. And there's no formal business occurring between those churches. All right. Now, this is really confused, I think, and sometimes I think when if a church is not in ARBCA, or if a church is not in the SBC, then it's assumed that they are not associational, or that they do not believe in associationalism. All right, that they are just independent in the sense that they have cut themselves off from any sort of inter-ecclesial fellowship whatsoever, and that's not necessarily the case. So there can be independent Baptist churches who observe in one another a common profession of doctrine, and then on the basis of that common profession of doctrine, they fellowship with one another. And this fellowship just looks like having conferences with one another, spending time with one another, inviting one another to certain events, and opening, the congregation opens their homes to the other congregation in the case that they're traveling through town or coming to visit. This is a form of associationalism that may not be as formal as something like ARBCA or the SBC, yet there is an association going on there. There's an association going on there that exists on the foundation of doctrine, even though there isn't business necessarily passing between those churches. All right, that as far as the business is concerned, monetary support of missionaries and accountability of missionaries, what they're doing and what they're teaching, flow through the local churches as individual local churches. And then those local churches they enter into a friendship with one another, a fellowship with one another informally. Now, I would even say that if they came together and signed a document that just basically validated their fellowship along the lines of doctrine, all right, because all fellowship and unity needs to be built on the truth, and so that leaves you with building fellowship upon the foundation of what you believe to be the truth as expressed in, and you can't just say in the Bible, because a lot of people just say, we believe the Bible, and they believe very different from us. So what distinguishes us from those people? And then you have something like a confession of faith arise, and then several churches may get together and put their church names and the names of their pastors on that confession of faith, saying this is the doctrine we ascend to together. It's an expression of our fellowship and the harmony between us as churches. But you still do not need to have business passing between those local churches. And I keep using that term business passing between local churches, but probably one of the biggest risks that a person could put their church in, or that a congregation could rather put themselves in or subject themselves to, is to subject your church to a brand. And what I mean by that is this: whenever the Tom Chantry drama kicked off in ARBCA, you had, I think at the time, there were somewhere around 50 churches in the association, maybe just a little shy of that. There had been some churches that had left prior to that point due to the impassability debate. But before the Chantry thing really got kicked off and became really widespread in terms of churches knowing about it and what was going on, and court cases coming to pass and all of this, there were something like between 40 and 50 churches in the association, I believe. after the chantry thing was settled and statements came out, formal statements came out, kind of declassifying, as it were, some of the things that were going on the back end, a lot of other churches left. And I think the association's down to like 13 churches now. Now, one of the things that inevitably happened in that situation is, say you have a person driving through Kansas. I don't even know if there's an ARBCA church in Kansas or if there ever has been, but just say that you had a person driving through Kansas on vacation and they needed a place to worship because they're traveling on Sunday out of necessity. And they look on a church search website and they have a choice to attend an ARBCA church that's in the association and a church that's not in the association. And all they know of ARBCA is this scandal that's going on. And they say, well, we don't want to go visit this church because of the scandal that they are involved in, inadvertently so, because they are branded, right? They are part of that association, and so they must be involved in the business of that scandal in some way, shape, or form. So we don't want to go there. We want to go where, there isn't any of that going on. And to strengthen that further, say this person's not just taking a vacation. They're not just passing through. This is a person looking honestly and genuinely for a local church to attend and eventually become a member of, and they've got a family. And they have a church. They have options, right? They have a church that is an ARBCA church, and they have a church that's not an ARBCA church. And, they're considering everything that's going on in ARBCA. They've read the news. They know what's going on. So they want none of that. So they go to the other church, right? So that ARBCA church, regardless of whether or not they had anything to do with the scandal, is nevertheless known for the scandal because they're branded as an ARBCA church. And everyone knows that all of this stuff happened in ARBCA, and so all of that is going to be imputed to any church that bears the name ARBCA or that admits that they are associated with other churches in that association. That, to me, is, in my way of thinking, is a way of actually harming the congregation, because not only is it what you're doing at that point is you're basically saying we're going to hang in this association, we're going to be in this association, and you're going to lose families because of it, right? So you're actually causing division within your own church, holding on to something that's not biblically necessary to hold on to. And then you're putting a stumbling block in front of the gospel, because there are people who are considering coming to your church who decide not to come precisely because of the brand that you wear, namely ARBCA. All right, so that's how a brand can actually affect a local church, even if the local church wasn't involved in kind of a more a scandal that took place at maybe perhaps a different level or in a different place of the country. It doesn't matter. That's not how people think. People don't always parse those issues, right? And then they would be asking questions like, well, why, given the scandal, why are they staying there? Why haven't they made a move yet? And that question, brings up the questions of the ethics of the church and all of this. And you just don't want to give someone reason to impute something like that to your church, right? Now, how does this play out in something like an informal, unbranded association? Let's say that the church, one of the churches that you informally associate with, has someone who becomes a heretic, a pastor that becomes a heretic, and begins affirming heterodox doctrine. Well, guess what? You're not under the same brand. You don't have the same graphics representing you, the same name representing you, and so you don't. It's not as easy to impute the sins of that church to your church, and you can depart from them in a way that's not going to harm your congregation and in a way that is not going that's not going to be this big news headline up on people's blog websites and stuff like that, because you're not subject to sharing a name or a brand with that church who's now had a pastor who's gone off the rails and they've failed to correct him or they failed to remove him, and now it's an apostate church. And if that happens and you're in a branded association, a formal association, well, guess what happens? Your church gets lumped in with them, especially if you remain in the association, right? Because you're trying to save the association or whatever. You get lumped in with them. You get lumped in with the controversy. You get lumped in with all of that. Whereas if you're not part of a formal, branded, I will say, association, then you protect your congregation, or the congregation rather protects itself from dealing with that extra potential baggage that never had to happen in the first place. Okay, so this is the difference between just thinking. I've been in and out of associations, right? I've been members of churches in and out of associations. I've been a member of SBC Church. I went to an SBC seminary. I was a member of a church in Arbka, Dear Church. But I think that in all honesty and fairness, that the association with Arbka has actually hurt that Dear Church, and that's unfortunate. And now I currently, by God's grace, pastor a church that we are not formally associated anywhere, and we won't be. Now we have informal associations. We have churches that we fellowship with. Well, I have pastors that keep me accountable, and that I can bring issues to and ask questions and things like that. So in a way, we're functioning in all the good things that exist in a branded formal association exist in our informal association without the dangers posed or the dangers that come along with kind of the more formalized associations. And so that's just something to think about. If you belong to a local church, and say you're even in the leadership of that local church, be very careful about the association that you are a part of, and think about this, and just in the interest of being prepared for what might come down the road and what your congregation might be subjected to in the future. Think about this very seriously. And then if you have taken a call at something like an independent church, and you have been determining in your heart to eventually move them toward a formal association, maybe rethink that as a result of what's been presented here. Now, what I want to say, and I want to be very careful to say this, and I want to be very clear about this, is that churches in formal associations are not bad. They're not heterodox. They're not apostate. They're not wicked. I don't even think they're in sin. I don't think they're necessarily in sin. I would just disagree with doing that. I would disagree with them in that particular way of associating. So I think associating is a good thing. I think associating with other churches is a good thing. But I would disagree with them in terms of the way they have chosen to associate. And I don't think that it is a good way to link arms, so to speak, for the cause of doctrine and missions and things like that. I think there are better ways to do that, in fact. So, and now I do think there's a point at which it would become sinful, where the formal association ends up taking precedence over your congregation. I think that actually does become sinful at that point. But as far as how you choose to associate as a church, I don't think that it's necessarily sinful in and of itself to associate formally. But there is a risk involved, and that risk needs to be needs to be well known before entering into some kind of a formal association like that. So hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, give me a thumbs up. If not, give me a thumbs down and let me know why. And please don't forget to click the subscribe button down below, and then go ahead and pop that bell. It's a bell. Go ahead and pop that bell for continued notifications so that you can, get notifications when I put out new content and things like that. God bless you guys. Have a wonderful rest of your day.